Tom Glannon, and I don't write poetry, but I like to read it aloud. And so I'm going to read two poems here. The first one is rather comical. This is by a young poet named Samuel Amadon, wrote a book called The Hartford Book. He was born and raised there, and so you might think that he's saying a lot of very nice things about it. But he isn't. He isn't. I don't have anything against Hartford or Connecticut or anything like that, but I thought that this poem was quite interesting. Okay, he describes a very painful experience walking through a park. He sees this statue. He does some research on it and gets a poem out of it. So this was one of the few poems in this book that I could really understand. So it's one of the few that doesn't have quite a few bad words in it. Harassment and whatever. And I notice it's the only one of his poems that he has directly on his website. So you have to imagine me being 31 years old and walking around Bushnell Park in Hartford and being Samuel Amadon, having done drugs and alcohol and all kinds of awful things. And this poem is called WOWS, and it's about Horace Wells, who supposedly invented something. Well, in Bushnell Park, there are only a couple of statues. And while I knew who Minerva was, I wasn't sure about Horace Wells. And I wanted to know because the plaque underneath him says, the discoverer of something I couldn't see. I didn't think anyone in Hartford had ever discovered anything except for guns and drugs. And when I looked them up, I found out I was right. Because the thing Horace Wells discovered was anesthesia. It's some kind of show where a bunch of people inhale nitrous oxide on stage and then ran around like idiots. And when one of them hurt his leg, he kept running and seemed to feel nothing. And Wells, who was a dentist, thought maybe he could use this. So he got some nitrous and put himself under and had a tooth pulled without any pain, which he thought would make him famous. So he went to Boston to put on an exhibition and called someone out of the crowd to go under. But the man didn't breathe from the bag long enough and felt Wells pull and screamed, and everyone heard it, and no one else would volunteer. And no one wanted to believe Wells, except for William Morton, who stole the idea using ether instead of nitrous, and got patients and patents and a job at Harvard. And maybe Wells never knew it, but credit in the book goes to Morton. Or maybe he did know it because Wells sold his practice and left his wife and went to New York, where he went mad and went to jail for throwing sulfuric acid at prostitutes. He, in his cell, inhaled chloroform from a rag and cut open his groin vein and died. And the only people now who think he discovered anything are some people in Hartford who can't read the sign. And probably don't care what it is. So this next poem by James Wright is called A Blessing. It's in a totally different vein. It seems to me is one of the hardest things in poetry is to achieve a sense of ecstasy created for the reader and then come up with a good ending and then quit. Finish up quickly before you start making all kinds of sentimental, mushy comments about things. And I think James Wright does this, okay? So it's interesting that this involves an actual event that happened. He and Robert Bly, the famous poet, were driving around on the highway near Rochester, Minnesota, and James Wright saw these two horses, two ponies. He got so excited. They jumped out, jumped over the fence, petted the horses for a little while, and then Wright sat down and he was in the passenger seat and wrote more or less this poem. And Bly, Robert Bly, who can be quite sarcastic and cynical, said, yeah, it was great the way he was petting those horses, and they seemed to appreciate it. But I bet if he'd done it 5 more minutes, at least one of them would have bitten him. So this is the poem by James Wright called Blessing. Okay. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bound softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darkened with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly, I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom.